Welcome to my new series. Over 10 videos, I'll be taking you on a road trip across the USA, narrating one horror story from every state. From the mountains to the valleys, and from killers to urban legends, we'll discover why you sometimes have to be brave in the land of the free. Question is, which part of the country has the most chilling story to tell? Well, there's only one way to find out. So sit back, relax, and get ready for a trip down Route 666. It's gonna be a bumpy ride. This story takes place in Wilmington, Delaware. I'll start by saying I'm a female. At the time, I was 26 years old, and I lived by myself in a small house. My boyfriend had just dumped me and left me stranded paying all the rent. As such, I had to moonlight at a bar a few nights a week just to pay the bills. The bar itself was pretty great, definitely a job worth doing while you're still young. Most of our customers were just friendly Wilmington people, but occasionally you get the odd creep or drunk ruffian. Drink can bring out the devil in some folks. There was this one customer who seemed to come in every time I had a shift. A man in his mid-40s, stood around 6'1", I'd say. Went by the name of Dennis. He had a handsome face, but it was all wrinkled, and his obviously once athletic body was now a bit out of shape. He had a small beer belly and dark bags under his eyes. Drove an old, once white van, the colour of which had obviously faded over the years and turned cream. Always parked it right outside. I figured I knew this guy's story pretty well. Probably a bit of a lady killer back in his youth, but was now past his prime and couldn't get over it. Didn't know any other way to live. While all his old buddies that he used to party with got older and settled down, he never got out of the cycle. Kept on partying half the week. Some people can never let the past go. Dennis would always sit at the counter and chat with me. I worked there, and it was part of my job to be nice to the customers, so I of course let him. The first few times he talked to me, he seemed really friendly and a nice guy. As time went on though, he became a little more creepy. He started making uncomfortable remarks, and would grab at me inappropriately. I never made a big deal out of it, but made it clear that he couldn't do what he was doing. He always smiled and apologized, vowing to never do anything weird again. He never kept those promises. One night after closing time, I was walking back home by myself. It was dark, and the streets were empty. Plenty of side alleys lined the path that I was walking down. I only lived about 10 minutes away, so I wasn't too unnerved about travelling home alone. As I made my way down the dimly lit streets, I realised I could hear footsteps behind me. I looked over my shoulder, and sure enough, there was Dennis, keeping pace with me, with his hands in his pockets. I picked up my pace, and he picked up his. It was obvious he wasn't just keeping pace with me now. He was actively gaining on me. What his intentions were, I didn't know. I began sprinting down the road, with Dennis hot on my heels. I turned the corner and lucked out. Another passerby. I ran quickly over to them, and Dennis turned down one of the side alleys and disappeared. I told my manager about it the next time I had a shift at the bar. Dennis wasn't allowed back in after that. My next-door neighbour, Jim, just so happened to be a police officer. He was a real nice guy, still is, and we sometimes chatted outside our houses when we met each other at the front doors. When I saw him outside his place one day, I happened to mention my new bar job. I ended up telling him all about my creepy customer, Dennis. "Sounds like a loser," Jim said. "You gotta shut guys like that down real quick. Make sure they get the message. Otherwise they might never leave you alone." "Yeah," I told him. "I'm starting to get that now." He really spooked me though. I just didn't want to be rude to customers since I'd just started working at the bar. I really need that job, you know. Well, I'm sure he gets the message now. I'll keep an eye out for you just in case. We said our goodbyes, and I headed back inside my house to enjoy another lonely evening in front of the TV. About 2 weeks went by. I, of course, hadn't seen Dennis at the bar in all that time, seeing how he was banned from entering. I'd just finished a late-night shift, and I'd made it back to my place safe and sound. I went inside, threw on my jammies, and hopped into bed. I'd had a couple of drinks while chatting with some customers there, so I drifted off to sleep pretty quickly. Next thing I knew, I was awoken by a loud commotion in my hallway, just outside my bedroom. It sounded like fighting. After honing my ears for a moment, I snapped out of my sleepy haze and jumped out of bed. I ran out into the hallway. It was my neighbor, Jim. Underneath him was Dennis. Jim was pinning him down on the floor. "Call the police, now," Jim shouted. I didn't stop to ask questions. I just did as he told me. You see, Dennis had broken into my home while I was asleep that night. He'd used a quiet, glass-cutting tool on one of my downstairs windows. That's how he'd entered the place. He'd brought a sort of club with him, and a chloroformed rag was found in his pocket. My neighbor Jim just so happened to be awake late that night. He noticed a cream-colored van outside my house which he had never seen before. I never usually have visitors over, especially not that late at night. Remembering the story I'd told him, Jim became suspicious and wanted to make sure everything was okay. He checked the perimeter of my house and found that one of the windows had been breached. He climbed in after Dennis and caught him off guard. Thanks to his training, he was able to overpower Dennis. They searched the van outside my house. In the back was a mattress, along with 4 sets of handcuffs to restrain my limbs. Dennis wanted to drag me out to that van, and he didn't want any kind of screaming or resistance. You can guess his intentions. What I don't like to think about is where he was planning on taking me, or what he planned to do with me once he was finished. In all likelihood, the only reason I'm here to retell this story is because I happen to live next to a policeman, and that I also happen to tell him about Dennis and his van. For the past 15 years, I've been delivering groceries in Nebraska. A lot of our customers have been using us for a long time, though this story has to do with one household in particular. For the sake of privacy, we'll call them the Wilson family. For almost the entire time I've worked this job, the Wilson family have been using our delivery service. Once, or sometimes twice a week, I'll drop by their place to deliver their groceries. The mama of the house is called Marie. Her husband was called Tex. I ain't sure if that was his real name or not, but that's what he went by, and the guy was a real modern-day cowboy. Wore the whole get-up, and always addressed me as cowboy. "Morning, cowboy," he'd say as he saw me coming up his driveway. "Catch you later, cowboy," he'd say as I bid him farewell. He always said this while bringing 2 of his fingers to his head, like a real cowboy would if he was lifting his hat or something. I always returned the gesture. We bonded over the years, and would sometimes get lost in conversation with each other. Real nice guy, Tex was. Didn't have the healthiest of diets, though. I could tell by his shopping cart. Seemed like the guy was living off bacon, sausage, and steak. Sadly, the old man's diet caught up with him in the end, and Tex kicked the bucket 5 years after I started delivering to him. I shed a few tears for the guy the evening I heard the news, and had a drink to his memory. Marie kept on ordering from us after that. For 9 or so years, I kept dropping by her place as usual, this time with a smaller haul of groceries than when Tex was still with us. A lot can change over 9 years, let me tell you. I got to watch as their 2 young sons grew up into teenagers, and as their house changed with the times, as Marie sold Tex's beloved motor car, and as her life went on, and she got married to another guy called Phil. Their haul increased after that, as did the number of deliveries I had to make to their house every week. Recently, though, something strange happened when I made one of those deliveries. I came by their house as usual, only to see Tex's old car outside their home, looking just how it had years before, same paint job and everything. Marie must have tracked down the buyer and bought the car back off him. Maybe she was feeling sentimental and wanted to hold on to that piece of Tex after spending so many years without him. Who knows? I knocked on the door, and Marie answered. Strange, I thought. Her face seemed distinctly less wrinkled than I remembered. "Mrs. Wilson," I said, "you're positively glowing." She blushed a little and thanked me. then invited me inside to drop the groceries in the kitchen. "Got old Tex's car back, I see," I said to her. She let out a little laugh. "Did he tell you he sold it then? That ugly thing'll be with us until he kicks the bucket." I was a tad confused by her reply, but brushed it off and put it down to the old woman's brain going a little gaga with years. Something else seemed a little weird though. The decor of the house. It was like it had been years ago. Old photos were strung up on the wall of the kids when they were much younger. All of the furniture was like the stuff they used to have in the past. My mind started darting around. Had she dumped Phil? Gone a little doolally or something? Was she trying to relive the old days when she was with Tex? I daren't ask. Didn't want to cause any drama. I walked into the kitchen to put down the groceries. Sitting at the table, eating their breakfast, were Marie's 2 sons. But that's the thing. They weren't teenagers. They were just kids again, like how they looked in all the old photos on the wall. Impossible, I thought. They must just be her nephews or something. She was just babysitting some relatives' kids. But they looked so identical. They could have been clones of her children from the past. I put down the groceries and immediately made my way to the front door, not stopping to chat with Marie. Something felt off about the house. I didn't like it. I needed some air. "Leaving so quickly?" she said as I speed walked to the front door. "Yes," I managed to spurt out. "Sorry, I'm in a rush today. Have a good one, Mrs. Wilson." I reached the front door, which was still open, but something made me stop. I can't describe the feeling, but I knew I had to turn and look over my right shoulder, past it into the living room behind me. I trusted my instinct and turned my head. Sat there in an old, familiar armchair was an old, familiar man. "Catch you next time, cowboy," he said to me, raising 2 fingers to his head. A strange feeling came over me. Not fear. Warmth. I'd recognize that face anywhere. I gave Tex a smile and raised my 2 fingers out of respect. I then walked out the front door and closed it behind me. I looked out onto their driveway. Tex's old car was nowhere to be seen. Nothing seemed out of place or old-fashioned. Everything was as it should be. Back to normal. Back like it was in my time. I continued on with the rest of my deliveries for the day. I've made many deliveries to Marie since then, and nothing else weird has ever happened to me at that house. I decided not to tell her about the incident, fearing that she'd think I was making fun of her or insulting Tex's memory in some way. I've told my wife and friends about it. They all called me crazy, so I'm sharing my story here. Does anyone have any ideas about what this could have been? I've been racking my head for months now, and still can't think of a rational explanation. Did I experience a time warp? A brain spasm? Some sort of glitch in the Matrix? I have no idea, but I was completely lucid. Didn't have anything weird in my system, and saw and heard everything plain as day. I don't know what to make of all of this, but I will say, Tex, it was good to see you again, cowboy. There's a curse in my family that's persisted for the past 4 generations. To be honest, the thought of it keeps me up at night sometimes, as I know pretty soon it's going to start affecting me too. Back in the day, 2 men went onto native land in Standing Rock, North Dakota, and did a spot of grave robbing. One of those men was my great-granddad. By all accounts, not a nice guy. Neither was his buddy he went with. My ancestor was 31 at the time he did this despicable thing. I don't know if he dug up one person or multiple, but his get-rich-quick scheme came with some serious consequences. As the story goes, about a week after, he started complaining about a visitor. He told all his friends about this dark, shadowy figure that would follow him wherever he went. Sometimes he'd be sitting with his buddies, and all of a sudden he'd go into a terrified frenzy, screaming about the shadow man outside the window. Nobody else ever seemed to see it. They figured he'd just lost his mind. He lived the rest of his days as an outcast, disowned by everyone who once loved him. Can't say I feel sorry for the guy after what he did. Unfortunately, the consequences of his actions have passed down the family line. You see, whenever any male in my family turns 31 years old, and I mean right on their 31st birthday, they all start complaining about seeing the same shadowy creature. They describe it as the black outline of a man, but with no facial or bodily features, just a black void in human form. What they all say it does have are two piercing red eyes. No mouth, no nose, no hair, just two red eyes that seem to stare straight through you. It happened to my granddad, his brothers, my father, and my uncles. They all suffered with visitations. My father still does. Sometimes the figure comes once a week, sometimes multiple times a day. There's no real pattern to the visitations. According to all of them, it just appears out of the blue, at any time, in any place, at any distance. Its horrible red eyes looking right at you. It could be standing in the middle of a crowd, or alone in an empty field while you're out for a walk. You could move several states away, and you'd still see the damn thing looking at you through a window. It drove my grandfather insane. He lost his mind in his 50s. 2 of his brothers ended their own lives, citing the visitor as the main reason. His last brother ended up moving away and cutting all contact with us. Don't know what happened to him in the end. One of my uncles too has gone mad from paranoia. Lost his family, his career, everything. He knew it was coming when he turned 31, but that didn't help him prepare. My other uncle jumped from a suspension bridge, said he'd had enough of the red-eyed man. Without exception, they all suffered from insomnia. The thing apparently came a lot more at nighttime, would stand at the foot of their beds for hours on end. My father, luckily, is still with us. I don't remember much of what he was like when I was a kid, but my mother tells me he hasn't been the same since he turned 31, back when he started complaining about the shadowy visitor. He's a real quiet guy now, never says much, and always seems to be on edge. I'm a male. At the time of writing this, I'm 29 years old. My brother is 27. As far as we know, there's nothing we can do to buy ourselves more time. We've chatted to a native elder about the situation. He gave us 2 small charms that he said to keep with us at all times to ward off bad spirits. I hope they keep the thing away from us, or at the very least, buy us a little more time.